Hi, I'm Dr. Jason J. Campbell, and I want to thank you for taking the time to watch my videos. In this video, I'm continuing my analysis into Nietzsche's Will to Power. It's been a while since I've been here at my office. I was shooting at the home office for a while, but I didn't like the lighting. So I decided to come back to the office so that my lecture series would retain sort of the visual aesthetic that I like. I didn't like the aesthetic at the house. I couldn't replicate the fluorescent lighting, so I decided to bring it back to the office. So I'll be continuing this and all my future lecture series from the office, where I've been shooting the vast majority of the lectures. And I'm going to continue with section 10.6 in my lecture notes. As you guys know, if you want to gain access to the lecture notes, just click the link in the description field. It'll take you to the PDF. I've just updated it. I've taken a brief break from lecture series, but I'm going to, my idea is to just continually press Nietzsche's Will to Power. I want to, I guess, you know, I change week to week, but my vibe is I just want to finish off Will to Power. So I'm going to continue to do this lecture series until hopefully I've done the entire book. We're more than a third of the way there. This lecture series will take us to about 390, almost 400. About 550-ish is about the halfway point. So we're approaching the halfway point. And within the next few hours, we'll approach the 50-hour mark, which was my initial goal. So with that, again, we're going to be using the work from Walter Kaufman, and this is Nietzsche's Will to Power. Notes, click the link, it'll take you to the PDF. We're on page 68 of my notes, and with that, let's begin Nietzsche's Will to Power. So this is Nietzsche's Will to Power. And we're doing, this is section 10.6, and it covers notes 374 to 379. Okay. Let me get one that doesn't make as much noise. Alright, so this section covers 374 to 379 in the notes. Nietzsche. This is the, I've titled this section, The Genius of the Actor or the Artist, right? I'm going to use actor and artist almost interchangeably in this section, right? The genius of the actor, the artist. Okay, this is a quote from note 374. Every society has the tendency to reduce its opponents to caricatures, right? Every society has its tendency to reduce its opponents to caricatures, at least in imagination, and, as it were, to starve them. Okay, the idea is we take our opponents, right? Us versus them. Us versus them. And what we do is we project onto our opponent a caricature, an image. Right? We project a caricature onto the image of our opponent, right? We, in a sense, dehumanize the opponent. It doesn't have to go as far as dehumanization, but what we usually do, typically speaking, is we'll look for either intellectual, physiological, religious, spiritual distinctions between us and them, right? They look like this, we look like that. They believe in this, we believe in that, right? We project a caricature of our opponent in order, an imaginative caricature onto our opponent in order to, as Nietzsche says, to starve them, to rob them of the necessary quote-unquote nutrients, means of sustenance. I want to read a bit from page, or from note 374. 374, okay. Such a caricature, so this is 374 in Nietzsche's Will to Power. Such a caricature is, for example, our criminal. Within the aristocratic Roman order of values, the Jew was reduced to a caricature, right? The Romans reduced the Jew to a caricature. Among artists, the Philistine and bourgeois became caricatures. Among the pious, the godless, right? Those who were pious, the godless became caricatures. Among aristocrats, the man of the people. Among immoralists, it is the moralist. Plato, for example, becomes the character in my hands, right? Plato's depiction of both the state in the Republic and the sort of degradation between individuals within the state becomes a caricature, right? The idea as almost a caste system, if you will. The idea is the depiction of the other, the depiction of the opponent, of the enemy, in terms of the caricature that you've created, devalues, robs the enemy of any legitimacy, and that's the point, right? Whether, and we'll see later, whether or not this is true is irrelevant. It really is irrelevant. What we'll see later is the ambiguity with respect to truth and the ambiguity with respect to the role of lies. We'll talk about that in another section in just a few minutes. But the idea is a recognition, a very simple recognition, and this should be obvious, right? That insofar as it's us versus them, the way that we maintain and preserve this distinction, right, this dichotomy, this dichotomization between us and them, the good guys, the bad guys, is that we create a caricature of the other. That caricature of the other is what we then use to inform the population of them, who they really are, right? So that rather than the population gaining access to understanding who they, the other, is, they gain access to an understanding of they in terms of the caricature that has been created, right? So that's sort of it's sort of obvious, I think, at that point. So here's another quote from Nietzsche, note 376. Man's growing inwardness. Inwardness grows from a powerful drive that has been denied outward release by the establishment. Inwardness grows from a powerful drive that has been denied outward release from the establishment. By turning inward, in concert with imagination, in the artist there reappears the repressed power to dissimulate and lie. Right? The idea is the individual, right? The individual, and we'll talk about this individual as the artist. Right? The individual as the artist projects his or her sensibility, his or her subjective interpretation out into the world, right? So we can call this, at this point, subjective interpretation out into the world, and that interpretation, X, whatever it might be, is denied. By whom? By the establishment. Right? That subjective interpretation is denied by the establishment. The canon, the status quo, denies the subjective interpretation of the artist. Why? Because they recognize that the subjective interpretation, if it's powerful enough, can restructure the way in which we make sense not only of the world, but of the other person, right? If we said before that the relationship between us and them is one in which we use a caricature to demonize, to dehumanize the other, any interpretations that would seek to transform the relationship of this dichotomous relationship of us and them to a recognition that it is more birelational. If we attempt to humanize the recognition of the other via art, right? I think of Picasso's, and I'm not a big art critic here, but quick one that came to the top of my head, Picasso's Guernica, right? You see the representation of dismembered body parts, horses, people, in very sort of abstracted sense. It touches on you in a sense, because that could be me, right? Those pieces, those body parts could be my parts. So in the other, I see myself, right? We don't want that. If there is a sense in which I can empathize with the other via artistic representation, via the aesthetic presentation, if there is a sense in which I can see myself in the other, it makes it that much more difficult for me to dehumanize the other. The establishment is not going to allow that, right? The status quo isn't going to allow that. So that you have immediately, which will get more complicated as we progress, a polemic and a polemical relationship between the status quo and the establishment and the artistic community as such. And you would imagine that the establishment wants to co-opt the artist by means of propaganda, by means of control, by means of social mobilization, what have you.